Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was sent to another realm by a goddess. To save an entire world from a madman, one goddess has given the Kages a means to send Naruto to another realm. Will Naruto be able to discover Kushina's divine identity, and can he survive the challenges of being her son? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 27. Naruto frowned slightly as the principal droned on during the commencement of the middle school graduation ceremony. In his mind, graduating middle school wasn't much of an achievement. It wasn't that difficult for Naruto, even without factoring his horde of Kage Bunshins doing his homework. Biology, mathematics, chemistry, and the sciences in general were the same on Earth as they were in the elemental nations. English and history took a bit of effort, but nothing strenuous to Naruto. School for him was simply a place for him to acquire the skills and knowledge helpful for him to blend in with normal mortal society. He still had at least a decade to go before he could hope to return to Konoha based on what his mother had last told him. At least Naruto didn't have to worry about finding a job to support him once he was 18. He was already making a fairly generous amount of money teaching Camp Half-Blood alumni how to use chakra. Then there was the dragon horde he got from the Zmagornik. That cave had an emperor's ransom in gems, diamonds, old coins, gold bars, and even reams of paper currency thanks to a few lost armored cars. Added to the mortal money were the heaps of hack silver, drachmas, and strange coins which Sklep later informed Naruto were denarii used by the Romans. The only problem Naruto had at the moment when it came to money was figuring out how he was going to launder all of it. His current idea involved using the mist to create a one-time lottery that he would win. There were some alumni and law enforcement who were looking over Naruto's plan to make sure it was legal before he started it. As the principal talked about how the students would have to apply themselves in their future studies in high school, and eventually their future careers, Naruto had forced down a snort of derision. Maybe 10% of the students here at most could see past summer break, let alone the next school year. Of those worried about the future, only a bare handful even gave a thought to college. If they did think about the future, it was as a dream of being a rock star or a star athlete. That wouldn't be a problem for Naruto if his fellow students worked for their dreams. All too often in the shinobi half-blood's opinion, his foolish classmates would simply expect their natural talent to carry their dreams through. A few would put in some practice for the skills of their dream profession, which did raise them slightly in Naruto's mind. However, an hour of practice, every day, every other day, or every 3 days didn't count for much in the shinobi's book. He still dreamed of one day becoming Hokage, and just like he did almost every day since he graduated the academy, he still trained his ass off to try and improve his skills. Even during his academy days, Naruto had spent a great deal of time training, and had tried to incorporate as much training into his pranks as possible. Was that the best type of training he could have done? With greater experience and knowledge, Naruto could honestly say that he didn't have the best training regime in the past that he could have had. However, he had made the most out of it, and no one in the academy could complain about his physical abilities. Naruto had always put in several solid hours a day training and always incorporated better training methods when he learned of them. Convincing him that a new method of training was better than what he was using could be a challenge. At least Naruto was now mature enough to admit he had a stubborn streak the size of the Hokage Tower. Eventually, the old windbag of a principal finished speaking and the students were ushered onto the stage, so that they could receive their middle school diplomas. That was a good thing for Naruto, as the hairs on the back of his neck were starting to rise in addition to Naruto's irritation at the length of the speech. Naruto was naturally towards the end of the line to walk across the stage, which he did without much fanfare. This was expected because as far as the mortals were concerned, Naruto was an orphan, and this was strictly an event for family. Naruto did sense a bit of divine energy floating around the room that wasn't coming from Rosweiss. He thought the excess energy had multiple deity signals, but he couldn't be sure given his sensor abilities. Still, it was comforting to know that his divine family was most likely observing this event. As Naruto sat back down, he noticed a spike in the background divine energy and frowned. It didn't make any sense for the divine energy he was sensing to be increasing. If anything, the energy should be dropping since his part in this ceremony was over, and his divine relatives probably had a lot of other tasks to deal with today. It couldn't be a monster as their energy was vastly different than any deity from any pantheon that Naruto had ever encountered. It was also impossible to alter an energy signal like chakra or divine energy. You could hide it, you could even mask it with another energy if you had the skills to store the other energy, but you couldn't alter it. Things became even more worrying when Roswise suddenly snapped her head to the right and frowned. A second later Naruto realized that the surge in divine energy was coming from that direction. He focused his sensing abilities in that direction and his eyes narrowed as the rapidly rising divine energy became laced with aggression. Immediately after the energy became aggressive, every animal in sight started to flee. Mortals around Naruto started looking at the fleeing animals in confusion. They couldn't see any reason for every animal in sight to get up and flee to the left like the hounds of hell were after them. Apparently, animals have better survival instincts than humans because moments later the ground started shaking. Someone in the crowd shouted out earthquake and everyone started to panic. This wasn't one of the minor earthquakes that they had to deal with every so often. This was a massive earthquake that causing the buildings to visibly shake up, down, back, and forth. The streets were cracking and underground pipes were erupting from the stress they were under. After one particular shake in the quake, Naruto caught sight of the sky, and his eyes widened in shock. Under divine influence, the sky turned from clear blue into an angry aurora with dozens of lightning bolts striking between the alternating streams of colors. However, the aurora storm was not the most frightening thing in the sky for Naruto. What really was frightening for the battle-hardened shinobi was that the sun and the moon had jumped their usual paths and had come together in an unexpected and unnatural eclipse. Unlike regular eclipses, the moon in this one was shining brightly like a full moon. Then there was the fact that the moon and the sun were constantly circling back and forth. For a few seconds the sun would eclipse the moon, letting out a furious corona of energy, and then the moon would force it out of sight only for the cycle to quickly start again. While Naruto was trying to make sense of this divine act, Roswise was trying to mitigate the damage around her. Not an easy task for her since as a Valkyrie she was equivalent in power between a nymph and a minor goddess in the West. When one factored in the fact that Roswise was only a couple of centuries old, things became even worse for the young chooser of the slain as her powers were closer to nymph levels than they were to minor goddess. Roswise pressed her hands against the ground and started to send out pulses of her own divine energy. These energy pulses cancelled out some of the divine energy coming from out of town, drastically reducing the intensity of the earthquakes. Other deities that happened to be within a couple hundred miles started to respond to the divine cataclysm in a similar manner, mitigating its effects on the mortal world. The young half-blood quickly noticed what his former teacher was doing and tried to think about how he could help out as well. However, before Naruto could come up with a plan, he senses an utterly gargantuan surge of divine energy. This new energy completely drowned the previous energy. Seconds later, everyone heard an enraged and protective matronly voice bellow out, "What the Tartarus do you two bitches think you're doing?" A split second after this bellow, everyone heard the thwacks of someone's fist connecting with another skull. Instantly, the earthquakes, the aurora storm, and the freak eclipse stopped as if it never happened. Someone's cell phone fell next to a nearby microphone and everyone heard over the speakers, which were somehow still working, "Fatality." The nearby mortals stared around in shock, trying to make sense of what they had just been through. Very soon, the mist started to cast an illusion over the mortals to help them make sense of what they had just witnessed. Hera walked down the streets of Olympus dragging a bound Artemis, who was out cold and looking like she had gone 10 rounds with all of the Titans. The sad thing was that Artemis had been whining slightly against Suna before Hera had ending the divine catfight. The fact that Hera had to end a catfight between two goddesses over her son made her want to groan in frustration. Sure, catfights happen among the goddesses, a lot more than they'd like to admit. That was to be expected when you have a lot of powerful people with massive egos living next to each other for centuries. Tartarus, even Hestia had gotten into a few scraps and mostly emerged victorious. The gentle goddess of the hearth had only lost one fight, and that was to Hera, who even before her power boost had been the undisputed champion of the goddess brawls. However, goddesses had never fought over a mortal to be their boyfriend/lover before. It was completely unfitting for their station as goddesses, or even their dignity as women. Things had always been extremely tense between the two goddesses ever since they met each other, and there had been a conscious effort on the part of those who had noticed the goddesses' interest in Naruto to keep them separate. That still didn't excuse their actions. Hera was certain that such behavior belonged squarely in ridiculous fetish porn she was constantly confiscating from the various gods who lived on Olympus. As if to rub salt on the wound, the fates arranged for that catfight to be over her son. Didn't she suffer enough being married to the king of jackasses? Wasn't having her diadem stolen enough of humiliation? No, she had to deal with two hotheads that had decided to forego being civilized and duke it out, nearly nuking several towns over who would eventually get to fuck her son. At least no one was around to watch Hera having to drag her possible daughter-in-law down Olympus's streets, so that the queen could chuck Artemis into her temple. The simple fact was that Hera was still radiating a great deal of power due to her anger at the situation. While not her full power, it was enough to drive most of the deities into hiding. Many were following Zeus's example and hiding under their beds in their temples. A few brave souls were pleading with the fates for mercy on the dumb fool who had earned the queen's wrath. Getting on Hera's bad side had always been a dumb idea for anyone, but now it would be less painful for someone on her shit list to just throw themselves bound into Tartarus. Hera took the long way to her temple, using the time to cool down and to inspect Olympus for any potential problems. Even when infuriated, a part of Hera's brain was keeping track of all the minor repairs needed and any zoning violations that would need to be addressed next time she was in the office. Even the dumbest of deities could figure out how to multitask after a few centuries. Not that you could really tell with many goddesses and most gods, as they just multitasked to think about sex. Hera preferred to use the ability to do her job, which was one of the reasons she was such a proficient ruler of Olympus. No longer was there an 11-month backlog on royal documents, thanks to Hera running things instead of Zeus. In fact, she had discovered that there was some graffiti on the royal desk that had gone unnoted for 2 ages since the desk had been taken from her father as part of the Olympian spoils of war. Said graffiti was a carving of Arenas smirking and saying that he had been there. When Hera got back to her temple, she immediately headed to her office and filed her observations on the appropriate forms. It took her about 45 minutes to fill out all of the paperwork. Sure, she could have used clones to speed the job up, but doing it the old-fashioned way helped her to calm down. It also was a mental victory over her husband that she could keep up with the paperwork, and he couldn't because he used to take far too many stress breaks. Stress breaks her ass, more like all-day-long whore-hunting trips. Still, Hera's quick turnaround time on paperwork helped to solidify her rule of Olympus even more than the beneficial rule changes she had put in place. Once the paperwork was done, Hera got up and headed to a hidden safe in her office. She quickly opened it and pulled out a sealed book that was stored within. After Hera learned about the Council of Regents that night from Naruto, she had sought them out. The council had been surprisingly easy for her to find, but then again, they knew that she would be searching for them thanks to the fates, and they had allowed themselves to found. Things had been a bit tense at first for Hera and the council, even though it wasn't as tense as when she learned about Asgard. A quick agreement was made and Hera was made part of the council and returned to helping to keep the Olympian subsection of the West from causing problems. The book in her hands was her copy of the translated Great Spirit's Codex, which Arenas had left to the fates before his disappearance. The original was written in a language that only Attic Yaman and the 4 kings could easily understand among deities. The fates were able to learn the language thanks to their position as overseers of destiny. Something in how Attic Yaman created the various deities made them unable to learn that particular deities outside of the kings, the fates, and the fates' counterparts. Many on the council figured it was subtle reminder that even though they were deities, they were not all-powerful. The Fates actually had to translate the original codex into a mortal language that was descended from the language of the codex, and then translate that copy into Greek. Hera quickly unlocked the book and opened it to the section that had concerned her the most since she found out about the codex. As she had often done before, the Queen of Olympus read the passage. By this sign shall you know that the trials will be upon the west. A pure deity twice born to the lords of harvest shall give birth to a babe with mortal flesh and divine soul. Sun and moon struggle where forefathers' land meets forefathers for the right to shed innocence's blood. The great bear's wrath calms the heavens and the land. When the present is forgotten, the past is revealed, and the truth of both must be known for the future to proceed. An idol to a false god is shattered beyond its Lord's reign. From the air shall the prophet learn of their ancestral ways. Maiden's pain or maiden's bane, the choice in ignorance is made. That which should help sours into pain. A demon born in bonds is set free. Sister and daughters are sacrificed to restore the shattered goddess's soul. The race of man regains its ancient lands by the air's command. Wicked seed is scattered as the den of corruption is consumed in purifying fire. Family is shattered, making brother fade brother. As three false kings fight, the true king reveals himself. By his prophet's hand is the king's reign proclaimed. To fealty or the fade will the pretenders go. By the king's command will the first false king be forced to fade by the prophet with cursed blade in hand. The throne restored, ancient bonds shall be renewed once more. Beneath the translated passage was almost a fifth of a page full of notes. One of these notes had been highlighted by Hera, and it made her very concerned. That particular note was the fact the sign in the original text did not have a fixed context. Was the sign of the upcoming trials the passage about the pure deity, or was the entire text of the page taken together the sign? Each interpretation was correct given the original language and structure. Hera, like everyone else on the council, or who knew about the codex, seriously hoped that the sign was just the passage about the pure deity, and that the rest of that text was merely describing the trials that would happen. The other option was far more frightening than could be imagined. Percy stood by Camp Half-Blood's lake going through some basic sword movements under the supervision of one of Naruto's Kage Bunshins. Unlike the other campers, Percy's sword was a kodachi made of cold iron, instead of a short sword made of celestial bronze. Percy's Selkie blood was showing as he was okay with the camp swords, even though anyone who had observed those sessions could see that swords weren't weighted right for him, and the boy was once again fighting against pre-built instincts. Given how Percy had taken to Kempo, Naruto and Chiron had decided to introduce Percy to a mix of Japanese kenjutsu and the fundamentals Naruto had observed in the elemental nations. The Japanese sword style was similar enough to the traditional styles of Naruto's homelands that it was easily able to fill in the gaps Naruto had in swordsmanship. Once again Percy surprised his cousin and centaur uncle by taking to the different sword style like a fish to water. It was actually a little scary just how rapidly Percy was advancing through the basics of kenjutsu, and his ability to make almost intuitive advancements in the style. At times Percy's lessons seemed less like a newbie learning the ropes and more like a seasoned veteran going through rehab after a serious injury. Naruto was constantly reminding himself that Selkies had a natural affinity for swordsmanship. However, his gut was certain that something else was contributing to Percy's skills. As Percy went through his kata, he hoped that his father would finally deem his skills good enough to acknowledge and claim him. Okay, so he wasn't the best student when it came to regular classes, and he was a touch slow on the uptake when it came to the Greek mystical side of things. But he was honestly trying. He was doing really great when it came to the ninjutsu classes, and in the general physical training now that Chiron and Naruto had figured out that he was better suited for a different style. Naruto had even gotten him the sword he was using as a gift. The older half-blood even got it in a rare metal that could be found up north, which was better suited to the monsters that lived beyond the gods since his mother had moved to Alaska. Wasn't that enough for him to be claimed? Over the past couple of months Percy had seen several new campers arrive and several of them had been claimed by their parents. What was he doing wrong that made his father not want to acknowledge him? Naruto frowned and said, "All right, Percy. We're going to take 5 and figure out what's eating at you. It's obvious that something's bugging you." The clone watched as Percy quickly returned his sword to its scabbard, and then the duo sat down next to each other. Naruto put his arm on his upward bent knee and lazily said, "Now why don't you tell me what's on your mind?" Percy sighed and mumbled, "What am I doing wrong? Why won't my father claim me? Does he even remember that I exist?" That thought gnawed at Percy far more than he wanted to admit. His mother had deeply loved and still loved his father. The thought that his mother might have been nothing more than a one-night stand or a tick on some sort of divine scoreboard burned him. Percy could eventually accept it if his father wasn't aware of his existence. After all, he had thought his father was dead before he learned about being a half-blood. If his father never acknowledged him, then wasn't that the same as him being dead for all intents and purposes? However, Percy couldn't and wouldn't accept the idea of his father treating his mother as some amusement to pass the time. A small tick of annoyance crossed Naruto's face when Percy mentioned his lack of claiming. A sizable minority of campers, especially unclaimed campers, liked to complain over the fact that Naruto had been claimed almost instantly upon getting to camp. Of course, those campers didn't know about all of the years in Konoha where Naruto had no clue about his family at all. Percy was not in that group, so Naruto's annoyance faded almost instantly. He then turned to look Percy in the eye and said, "I won't lie to you. There is a possibility that your father has forgotten about you and your mother. However, I don't think that's the reason why you haven't been claimed, Percy. The boss was told by your mother a while ago that your father told her about this camp, and that you'd need to come here for safety. You don't do that for someone you're just going to forget about. That being said, I can think of a very good reason why your father is not claiming you, Percy. You show a great deal of aptitude with anything water-related like canoeing and swimming, for example. From what we've gathered, your parents met each other at a beach. Finally, you have an extremely strong water nature chakra. By far it is the strongest affinity in camp outside of my own wind affinity. When you take all of that together, it makes it very likely that your father is an aquatic deity. Hopefully, he is simply a river god or one of the minor sea gods who help Uncle Poseidon manage the oceans. If you remember your lessons, Percy, then you know that all water deities either owe fealty to Uncle Poseidon or they are sympathetic to him. Currently, things are tense between Atlantis and Olympus because of my mother's missing diadem, and the only leads we've found to the thief implicate and Amphitrite. Back when Uncle Z was in charge, if something like this happened to him, he'd be blaming any half-blood who had the remotest connection to the suspect deity and causing all sorts of problems for them. A crackle of thunder boomed overhead, interrupting Naruto. He glared at the heavens and shouted out, 1788. Your favorite wine cup was misplaced for a few weeks by accident. Your rumblings and reprisals led to the final crop failures that helped cause the French Revolution. Camp records have 8 other recorded and confirmed events like this, so I am just telling the facts. Naruto returned to looking at Percy and said with a small smirk. As I said, Uncle Z would be blaming any half-blood who could be remotely connected to the theft if it was something of his, and he was in charge. Mom only took over control of Olympus from him less than 2 decades ago. That's not enough time for a deity to unlearn over 4,000 years of experiences. Most likely, your father is waiting until my mother's diadem is found until he claims you, since he's used to that being the safe option to protect you. The older half-blood's words made Percy feel better about his situation. It really didn't make much sense for his father to tell his mother about Camp Half-Blood, and how it was necessary for his safety if his father was just going to forget about them. Perhaps Naruto was right and his father wasn't claiming him because his father thought that he'd be safer unclaimed for now. If that truly was the case, then Percy had no reason to complain about his lack of claiming. But Percy still wished he knew who his father was. He should have learned by now to be careful about what you wish for. Artemis was recuperating from her fight with Suna in her private bathing spring at her temple. Thanks to some stockpiled healing elixirs and nectar, she was recovering at a good pace. Her healing might have gone faster if she went to her brother, nephew, or even her grandniece. But doing that practically ensured those details of her recent brawl would get out. Even if she and Hera could keep the other pantheons from being discovered in such a situation, there would still be massive fallout to deal with. Goddess squabbles always caused a lot of headaches and fallout on Olympus. While maybe not as massive in devastation as god squabbles, fights between goddesses tended to have aftereffects that persisted for years. Goddesses fighting over a mortal and with her being one of the goddesses involved? Olympus would still be dealing with the aftereffects by her and Naruto's diamond wedding anniversary if the news of it got out. That's not counting the ruckus Apollo and possibly her father would kick up, since that was a separate headache all on its own that she did not need to deal with. Fates willing, no one noticed Hera dragging her to her temple, and she could keep this incident buried. Artemis really wished that this whole fight had never happened, as she was utterly embarrassed to have gotten into a fight with Suna. Her cheeks turned golden from her embarrassment and rage at herself for fighting with Suna. It wasn't like Artemis intended to get into a fight with Suna. She had gone to Naruto's house in Alaska to congratulate him for finishing his current school, and talk about where they could meet up to head to Camp Half-Blood for the summer. Suna had also come to congratulate him and invite him to see a new movie that had just come out in theaters. The two goddesses had encountered each other at the front door, and things had gone downhill from there. Artemis couldn't remember exactly how things had degraded to name-calling, or who swung the first punch. Whether that was because of the several dozen headshots she received, or she was suppressing those particular memories, the goddess couldn't tell. At this point it honestly didn't matter which goddess started the fight. Artemis knew that she had the upper hand slightly against Suna before Hera came and introduced the younger goddesses to her fists. That fact didn't really matter when one considered the results of the fight, but it did act as a bomb on her ego. For the next hour or so Artemis stayed in her bathing spring, letting its minor healing properties augment the elixirs she took at their required times. Once all of her visible injuries were healed, she carefully stood up. Artemis was still very sore from the fight and knew not to push it. The goddess of the hunt looked down at her body, double-checking for any bruises, and frowned. While she didn't have any bruises, her base form had changed. Deities could take any form they wanted, but they all had a subconscious form that they'd return to when they weren't thinking about staying a particular shape. Artemis's base form traditionally was that of a 12-year-old girl who hadn't started to show any signs of puberty. Her adult form that she took during council meetings was simply a shift to make her stand out less. Now her base form was that of a 15-year-old young woman. Her form was still very athletic and toned from her constant exercise, but she now had hips that showed signs that they would become great for birthing and breasts that had a respectable bust line. Artemis really was annoyed at the breasts. Millennia ago she had gotten tired of Aphrodite talking about how great large breasts were and decided to show her how ridiculous she sounded and changed her form to have multiple gag boobs. Aphrodite got the last laugh on that one though by telling a few mortals about Artemis's gag form. The end result was that Artemis's greatest temple in Ephesus got stuck with its main statue in her honor being made to look like that gag. It took her centuries to live that one down. Especially since the mortals didn't get the message when she arranged for the temple to be destroyed twice in the hopes that they'd get rid of that statue. Perhaps it's for the best, Artemis muttered to herself. Staying roughly Naruto's physical age made things easier for her when interacting with her, now less reluctantly on her part, fiancé. Besides, did she really want to risk being accused of being in a relationship with a pedophile? A small shiver crawled down her spine at that creepy thought. It was definitely better in her option that her base form had changed rather than have her name be associated with that word in any way other than smiting. It was just one more thing that she'd have to get used to in her rapidly changing life. Chapter 28. In a remote region of Canada, one could hear agonizing and human cries of pain. A village of Laestrygonian giants was under assault by an enemy the Laestrygonians could not see. The village of 100 human-eating monsters was going up in flames as their attacker periodically set the buildings aflame as a distraction. It seemed to the brutes that every time they looked one direction someone would be attacked from another direction. A few saw a flash of light out of the corner of their eyes, but it was gone before they could react. The vast majority of the attacks on the Laestrygonians were fatal one-hit kills. However, a few of the monsters were lucky enough to avoid an instant death, and were nearly mortally wounded. These Laestrygonians quickly fell upon their dead comrades, desperately consuming their former friends' flesh to enhance their monstrous healing abilities before the corpses dissolved into dust. This act of cannibalism only increased the pace that the Laestrygonians were attacked. As the pace of attack sped up, the monsters were assaulted by a horrifying pressure that carried the promise of their deaths. Finally, the last Laestrygonian had her head bashed in from behind, and she fell to the ground to dissolve into dust. Naruto stood behind where the monster had stood with his kanabo in hand and a grim look on his face. Naruto looked about the burning village with revulsion clearly on his face. The Laestrygonians had once been a regular mortal people who collectively traded away their humanity for power. Their power was cursed, as in return for their great size and strength the monsters could only sate their hunger with the flesh of sentient beings. For the next few minutes, Naruto stood amid the burning village trying to gain control of his motions. Even if they were the worst sort of monsters morally, the monsters in this village had been living people with hopes and dreams of their own, no matter how dark those might have been. What made the experience all so terrible for Naruto was the fact that the worst had yet to come. These Laestrygonians had been preying upon the nymphs and mortal hikers of the region for months. They had even started arranging nature trips over the internet to bring their meals to them. For the greater good of the mortal and mythological populations, they had to be eradicated. Once Naruto had hardened his resolve again, he started moving through the village using his sensing abilities to try and find any life signs. Taichi was in a bitchy mood again, and Naruto sensed almost a dozen more life signs with chakra that matched a Laestrygonian's profile. Naruto quickly tracked the signals down to the basement of a building that wasn't on fire yet and nearly cried. The life signs he had sensed came from Laestrygonian children, which the half-blood shinobi discovered by looking through a basement window. For a moment, Naruto considered saving the children. They were only kids after all, and perhaps they could be rehabilitated to be part of society. What kind of monster would he be if he killed someone merely because of what they might do in the future? However, these thoughts vanished when Naruto noticed that the children were nervously eating satyr. The look of utter agony on the satyr's face, and the signs of struggle implied that the poor satyr had been alive when the children started to eat him. The look on the satyr's face hardened Naruto's heart, and allowed him to complete the grisly task at hand. Naruto slung his kanabo to his back and pulled out 2 kunai. He quickly sharpened the kunai with his wind chakra and then jumped into the room. Before the Laestrygonians could realize what was happening, Naruto and quickly ending the children. Once the children were dust, Naruto collected the half-eaten satyr's remains so that he could bury it. Naruto quickly left the village and passed by one of the many Kage Bunshins he had left to secure the village's perimeter. Without making a hand sign, Naruto created another 24 clones, and had them join his other clones to start making a fire break. Just because he wanted the vile village burnt to the ground did not mean he wanted a massive forest fire on his hands. About half a mile from the village, Naruto found a large oak tree that had taken a turn for the worst. No doubt the Laestrygonians had eaten the nymph that used to call it home. There was a nice clearing at the base of the tree, and Naruto quickly knelt down by it. He set the satyr gently on the ground and then dug a grave for him. Once the grave was dug, the young half-blood gently set the satyr in the grave. No coins were added because nature spirits didn't need to pay Sharon. After the satyr was buried, Naruto allowed himself to cry over his actions. Artemis was in her tent having a light breakfast with Zoe. The former nymph looked at her mistress and asked, "What is troubling you, milady? Is Naruto's expected arrival today bothering you?" Like the rest of the hunters, Zoe never felt completely comfortable with Naruto being in their camp. He was a good person for a boy, and he along with his clones always treated the hunters respectfully. It wasn't the difference that Zoe was used to from respectful males, but it was respect nonetheless. Naruto did not look down at the hunters for being girls, or get annoyed at them for rejecting the company of men. Such men were extremely rare that they might as well be extinct in Zoe's mind. Still, no matter how good of a person Naruto was, that didn't get rid of the fact that he was a guy who spent a lot of time in a hunter's camp, which was supposed to be a girl's only location. The goddess shook her head. Naruto's arrival today does not bother me. Privately, Artemis was thankful that Naruto either hadn't heard about her brawl with Suna, or that he was respectfully keeping quiet about it when he agreed to meet with her for the two of them to go to Camp Half-Blood. Although, you should expect him to be solemn if not glum, because he took out that village of Laestrygonians we have started to hear about last night. Zoe nodded her head, and then grabbed a few pieces of cheese. Thanks to that blow-up Naruto had with Annabeth last year, everyone knew about how he felt about taking lives. On the one hand, Zoe and the rest of the hunters could appreciate Naruto's respect for life. On the other hand, it was naively foolish of him in their opinion to give such views to monsters. Monsters that didn't want to hurt half-bloods, mortals, or nature spirits like satyrs or nymphs were even rarer than good men. Zoe could count those monsters with one hand and knew them all by sight, so she didn't accidentally kill them. Still, it was a foolishness that she could tolerate if it helped him stay semi-acceptable for her lady. A small smile appeared on Artemis's face as she glanced at Zoe's surface thoughts. Her thoughts then drifted back to what she was thinking about inside. Artemis took a small sip of nectar and then spoke. What is bothering me, Zoe, is the fact that I will only have sons in the future when Naruto and I are married. Thankfully for Zoe's sake, Artemis said that between bites or the lieutenant would have been choking from surprise. While Zoe and the hunters all knew about Artemis's marriage plans for Naruto, none of them had really given any thought to what Artemis being married might mean. It took a minute for Zoe to reset her mind after that announcement, and another minute to think of a response. Finally, she said, "Why must your future children be boys, milady? While I'm sure they would be excellent examples of what men should be with you as a mother, wouldn't you rather have daughters? As the goddess of childbirth, wouldn't it be within your power to determine what gender your children will be?" To Zoe's surprise, a stormy look crossed Artemis's face. The goddess sighed and said, "It is because of my powers that I know I will only have sons in the future, Zoe. I have over 40 adopted daughters currently living, but I will never permit myself to have a daughter of my own blood." A bitter look crossed Artemis's face as she continued. "I did some research and I discovered that any maiden with my blood would be unable to take the hunter's oath. Apparently, the power I use when accepting your oaths will interpret the power any hypothetical daughters of mine would have inherited from me as the oath already being in effect. So, even if I had daughters who gave me their oaths, they would never receive any of the blessings I confer on you all with the oath." It was a bitter pill for Artemis to swallow. She loved each and every one of her hunters as if they were her daughters. Once she accepted the fact that her years as a virgin were numbered, she started to consider the fact that she would be able to have children of her own as a silver lining. However, that silver lining became bittersweet when she realized that she wouldn't be able to have any blood daughters as her hunters. She also knew that it might cause her to resent her adopted daughters, and so decided she would avoid the problem altogether. Before Artemis could think further on this matter, she sensed a claiming occurring. Despite what many half-bloods thought, a claiming was far more than a holographic symbol of their divine parent. It sent a message to all deities about whom the child was and who their parent was. A small frown appeared on Artemis's face when she learned that Poseidon had claimed Percy Jackson as his son. This was not good. First, there was the fact that the great prophecy was in play again. However, a more immediate concern was the fact that a previously unknown half-blood son of Poseidon would be a reasonable candidate for the diadem's thief. Artemis just hoped that Hera remained less trigger-happy than her father usually was with this news. The next day after Percy got situated in Cabin 3, Chiron knocked on Cabin 3's door early in the pre-dawn morning. Percy quickly opened the door looking a bit disheveled in his pajamas. He then blurted out, "Why are you here so early, Chiron? Breakfast won't be called for another 2 hours." Chiron kept a small smile from appearing on his face at that outburst. "Percy, there's someone who has come to camp to see you. She is waiting for you in the big house, so please follow me. This is very important." These words were like a splash of icy North Atlantic water on Percy driving away away the remains of sleep that had been clinging to him. Percy knew that being the son of Poseidon was not a good thing for him at the moment. With the pledge for no more half-bloods, the mysterious great prophecy revolving around a half-blood like him, and the theft of Hera's diadem, things were not looking good for him. Percy just hoped that whoever had come to see him wasn't going to turn him into a tree. Chiron quietly led his half-blood nephew to the big house, and then led him to the side living room, which was rarely used by the campers. Amphitrite was sitting in one of the chairs that were in the living room, looking more like she was on a throne than a simple living room chair. The Queen of the Oceans gave Percy a cold, distant look, and then glanced at Chiron in a much warmer manner. "Thank you for arranging this meeting for me, Chiron. You may leave now, as you probably have much work to do maintaining this camp." Chiron nodded his head and politely backed out of the living room. He then closed the door, leaving Percy alone with his stepmother. Once they were alone, Amphitrite rose from the chair and looked down at Percy. After a few seconds of examination, she sighed and said, "I will be blunt, Perseus Jackson. I do not approve of your existence. While I am willing to tolerate your existence like I have your older half-blood siblings, I have never particularly cared for you and your similar siblings existing in the first place. Your father's recent oath only heightens my annoyance." Percy's hands turned into fists, and bit his cheek slightly to keep himself from verbally attacking Amphitrite. He could understand that she was annoyed at his existence. Any wife would be upset at their husband having an affair. However, it wasn't like he chose to be born as a son of Poseidon. Why was she bringing this up when both of them knew that this was going to be the case? What reason could she possibly have to come here, bringing up his existence, which must annoy her to her full attention, and pissing him off at the same time? Amphitrite read Percy's thoughts, and was pleased at what she saw. Very few half-bloods bothered to think about what their divine parents' family felt about their existence. Percy was young and definitely rough around the edges, but he would do. Poseidon was still going to be camping on the couch for a few months, but she might permit him back into her bed by the winter solstice. Amphitrite then spoke again, "I am pleased to see that you know how to somewhat control the temper you've inherited from your father. Still, it will be beneficial to you in the future to work on controlling it better." The Queen of the Ocean sat back down and almost smirked at the surprised look on Percy's face. "Do not be too surprised, Perseus Jackson. While I may not like to admit it, you and your half-blood siblings before are members of the Atlantean royal family, along with being my stepchildren. Your behavior reflects upon our family as a whole, so it is in my interests that you do not embarrass or shame our family. Besides, it would be hypocritical of me to attack you for being who you are, given that I have had such children in the past." For a moment, Amphitrite's thoughts drifted back to her most famous son, the Emperor Heraclius of the Byzantine Empire. In addition to his mortal exploits as emperor, Heraclius had driven the Roman half-bloods out of the empire when he overthrew the previous emperor. Even to this day, the Romans feared going into the western part of country they lived in thanks to Heraclius's actions. Returning to the present, Amphitrite continued to speak to Percy. "In addition to the fact that you are a member of family, there is also the fact that your father has given you to me as a champion. As my champion, your actions and deeds reflect on me. Any favors or recognition Poseidon might have received from your future actions will go to me instead. As such, any misconduct on your part also reflects on me. Given that a strong or intelligent half-blood could generate massive amounts of favor and glory for their parent, most gods and goddesses were extremely reluctant to let their children become another deity's champion." Amphitrite figured that Poseidon had suggested this, so that his punishment for breaking his oath would be mitigated. Not that she figured Poseidon's punishment could be as bad as Zeus's, as unlike his brother Poseidon hadn't been flaunting the oath practically every year since it was made. However, Perseus, Amphitrite calmly continued her explanation. "You becoming my champion also make me your patron. As your patron, I am responsible for making sure you have a fair chance at accomplishing any quests I give you. I am also expected to protect you from an inordinate amount of divine attacks due to your parentage or for being my champion. Do you understand what I have told you, young man?" Percy relaxed his fists slightly and replied, "Yes, Amphitrite." Percy couldn't say he was happy at this situation, as it sounded to him like his father had traded him to his stepmother like mortals traded baseball cards. The fact that she was constantly calling him Perseus instead of Percy was also annoying to him. A small tick of annoyance appeared for a second on Amphitrite's eyebrow before she smirked. "It is good that we understand each other, Perseus." Amphitrite deliberately emphasized Percy's full name as minor payback for him not referring to her as Lady Amphitrite. "Now, as my champion, you will be given a quest in the next couple of weeks. Your quest will be to clear my name by finding out who really stole Hera's diadem and returning it to her. Given your age and the difficulty of this quest, I am giving you some warning before I officially issue the quest. I expect you to make the most of this warning by preparing yourself as best you can beforehand." With that said, Amphitrite disappeared from the big house in a pillar of sea foam. Several hours after Amphitrite ended her meeting with Percy, Artemis came to Camp Half-Blood along with her hunters and Naruto. Percy was sitting by Talia's tree wondering what he was going to do about his future quest with Grover by his side when they heard everyone arriving. Percy noticed Naruto coming to camp first out of everyone in the group and frowned. He respected the older half-blood even if he mostly just knew him through the older half-blood's clones. Naruto had done quite a lot to help him, and Percy was afraid that Naruto would start giving him the cold shoulder since he was Poseidon's son. Several campers had started to distance themselves from him ever since his father claimed him. Annabeth and her sudden hostility towards him had been especially painful. What made that worse was that Percy couldn't figure out why she was upset at him. Grover quickly noticed Percy's uneasiness and said, "I wouldn't really worry about Naruto's opinion of you changing, Percy. Your cousin is someone who goes about life by their own rules. Besides, you're the last person Naruto would ever suspect of stealing Lady Hera's diadem, since he knows how ignorant you were of our world when he helped to rescue you from the freak dragon." That brought a small smile to Percy's face, and then his curiosity got the better of him. "Grover, why are the hunters of Artemis coming to camp? I understand that they came here for the summer session the past 2 years, but before that they only came by for a couple of days every few years. What changed?" With a slightly immature huff, Grover replied, "Naruto showed up. You know how in the school for half-bloods it's been mentioned that mortals do not always remember the events they dub Greek mythology with complete accuracy, and that there are a few stories that they either never heard of or forgot about. Athena's brain children are one example of this, since their existence was known in the ancient Greek world, and then it was lost." Grover then glanced at Naruto riding next to Artemis, giving him a slightly jealous look of a second. Sure, Grover knew he never had a shot at Artemis, but who could blame him for being a little jealous of Naruto? The boy was living every satyr's dream. Grover then shook his head and continued to explain things to his friend. Mortals never heard about this, but there was a time when Aphrodite started to harass the hunters and was making their lives extremely miserable. Artemis decided to put a stop to this by getting Aphrodite drunk and tricking her into a deal. Aphrodite agreed to leave the hunters alone if Artemis agreed to marry the first half-blood son of Hera. Since Hera doesn't run around having affairs with mortals, that is her husband's job, everyone figured that Artemis got off free with her deal and her hunters were safe. The satyr didn't need to say anything more to Percy about Naruto and Artemis's situation. Everyone in Camp Half-Blood knew about Hera getting so enraged at Zeus that she accidentally sent a fragment of herself to another world. It was one of the first things covered by Percy's teachers at camp to explain to him why Hera was in charge and not Zeus. A thought crossed Percy's mind and then he frowned. Has anyone asked Artemis how she feels about this? I mean, I thought she also swore never to marry, so she can't be happy about her current situation. With a shake of his head, the satyr quickly corrected Percy. You're thinking of one of the more inaccurate myths that mortals tell about the gods. Of the 3 virgin goddesses, only Hestia took a vow of celibacy. Athena and Artemis's status as virgin goddesses is a life choice for them. Artemis asked her father Zeus that he'd never force her to marry. All that means is that the only person who can determine who Artemis marries is Artemis herself. She has refused to accept everyone's marriage offers for her hand. As the goddess of maidens, Artemis isn't about to have a casual fling with anyone since that goes against maidenly honor. Several mortals mistook the oath Zeus gave Artemis as a vow of chastity, since among the mortal ancient Greeks fathers controlled their children's marriages. As for how she feels about the marriage, that's a rather dangerous question to ask. It's generally considered a wise move for mortals and half-bloods to not poke their noses in the god's business. That becomes doubly important when something the god or goddess in question is sensitive about comes into play. No one can say how she feels about the marriage, however the general consensus among the older campers and the nature spirits is that Artemis is either taking a neutral or a slightly positive stance to her upcoming wedding. Percy nodded his head and stood up. He then turned to Gover and said, "Well, we might as well go down and greet Naruto." Percy then stood up and started walking to the crowd, with Grover quickly following behind him. The surrounding half-bloods soon noticed Percy's presence and quieted down. Many of them were worried that a fight might break out between the two cousins. It had happened before on many occasions in camp that the children would fight when their divine parents quarreled. Naruto shocked most of the onlookers by quickly getting off of Bucephalus and quickly pulled Percy into a friendly hug. After a second, Naruto broke the hug and kept his hands on Percy's shoulders as he moved to stand an arm length away. A smile appeared on the older half-blood's face, and he cheerfully said, "Congratulations on your father finally realizing it was safe to claim you cousin. How are you getting used to having a cabin to yourself?" Everyone watched the two half-bloods. Many watched in shock while a few watched in amusement as Percy replied in a confused manner, "Ugh, thank you, Naruto. I'm still trying to get used to the new cabin, as it's very different from when I was staying in the Hermes cabin." Naruto nodded his head and said, "I'll take your word for it, Percy. Oh, before I forget, there's something I promised to give you." Naruto quickly pulled out a small scroll and opened it. There was puff of smoke as a large platter of warm, freshly baked blue chocolate chip cookies appeared in Naruto's hands. Naruto cheerfully handed the platter over to Percy, saying, "Here you go. One platter of homemade cookies that came from your mother's kitchen, and that was sealed out of the oven." Later at the campfire, Naruto was sitting next to the Artemis and the hunters, roasting 6 marshmallows. Each marshmallow was on its own chopstick, and Naruto was holding the sticks between his hands like a bizarre Wolverine. While Artemis technically didn't have to be at the campfire as a staff member, she had joined the campfire tonight as she always had. If asked, she would probably claim that she was there to make sure no one tried to start any problems with her hunters. However, practically everyone knew that the real reason for her presence was sitting to her right. As soon as the marshmallows were done, Naruto handed one to Artemis, gave 4 away to the nearby hunters, and kept 1 for him. Percy got up and approached Naruto just as the older half-blood made up a S more. Naruto looked up at his cousin and said, "Hey Percy, are you looking for some more marshmallows to roast? I think we still have a full bag around here somewhere." The younger half-blood shook his head, "Not at the moment, Naruto." He then said in a quieter voice, "I actually wanted to talk to you about an upcoming quest that I've been told I'll have to go on soon. Apparently, my father made me Amphitrite's champion, and as such I'm going to have to find Hera's diadem so that Amphitrite can clear her name of the theft. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind helping me out on that quest when it is issued." Artemis narrowed her eyes and waited to see if she would need to intervene. She didn't have to, as Naruto sighed and shook his head. "I really wish I could help you on the quest, Percy. Unfortunately, I'm explicitly forbidden to join your future quest. Since the 800s there has been a standing rule that half-bloods whose divine parents or champions are quarreling with each other are not to be on the same quest. There were cases in the past of gods and goddesses having their kids use the confusion in the middle of a quest to kill the other deity's child as a form of attack. I can help train you here at camp, but I can't help you on the quest." Naruto handed Percy his S-more and said, "Cheer up, Percy. I might not be able to go with you on your future quest, but I can still train you beforehand to maximize your chance of success. Besides, under the rule I'm the only one forbidden from joining your quest. The children of longtime rivals don't count for that rule unless their parents are quarreling. Naruto paused to glace over to where Annabeth was sitting with her siblings. Thanks to his shadow clones, Naruto knew that Percy had become friendly with Athena's daughter. A moment later, Naruto returned his gaze to Percy and he spoke in a serious tone. Percy, I want you to listen very closely to what I'm about to tell you. When you are issued the quest, you will be expected to go consult the oracle. When you do, you must listen closely to what she has to say, but you must also keep an open mind. Everything she has to say will have at least two meanings and can be interpreted in a dozen different ways. Percy nodded his head and replied, I know that, Naruto. It was covered in class a few weeks ago. Naruto gave Percy a hard, soul-piercing look. Do you really know what I'm telling you, Percy? Even the gods are prone to jumping to conclusions when it comes to prophecy. A prophecy is only truly clearly understood after the fact. Still, a wise person or someone humble enough to ask a wise person can understand a prophecy better than a regular person on his own. Take Luke Castellan for example. Naruto paused to direct Percy's attention to brooding scared teenager who was sitting off to the side. 2 years ago, he got a quest to try and steal a golden apple from my mother's garden. This quest has been issued many times in the past, but has only been completed successfully twice. I don't know what the full prophecy he received was, but I do know that one of the lines was success or failure rests with the gardener's aid. Luke took that line to mean that he needed the help of one of Demeter's children. Actually, the line was referring to a nymph that had once served in my mother's garden. Chiron knew this, but since he thought at the time the information was to be kept quiet, he was only able to hint at this. I discovered this fact through some research of camp records. Luke ignored both of our attempts to point this out to him since he was sure that he knew what the prophecy meant. 2 campers died as a result of his pride. Artemis spoke up at this point. Naruto is correct on this matter, boy. However, I am curious about something, Naruto. What did you mean when you said that the gods are prone to jumping to conclusions when it comes to prophecy as well? Many of the nearby campers and all of the hunters started to listen in at this point, curious as to what Naruto would say. A few were wondering if Naruto was going to go in the doghouse over what he said. Naruto put another marshmallow on a stick and put it over the fire. I meant exactly what I said, Artemis. Take this great prophecy that everyone is so worried about, for example. Many of your fellow gods and goddesses are reacting to it since it mentions the possibility of Olympus being raised. As such, you're jumping at the first interpretation you have that you think makes sense. For example, let me point out, everyone is jumping at their interpretation of the first line, a half-blood of the eldest gods. From what my mother told me, Zeus immediately assumed that this line referred a child sired by either him or his brothers. Since this is an interpretation of the prophecy, everyone quickly assumed that it is the correct interpretation, right, Artemis? The goddess quickly nodded her head and let Naruto continue. However, it is not the only interpretation. First off, the prophecy was said in English. This is important because English is mostly gender-neutral when it comes to nouns. The word gods are equally valid to use to refer to just male deities or the gods and goddesses in short form. This was even more so back in the 40s when this prophecy was issued. So right off the bat we've got 6 possible parents for the half-blood in question, if we go with Zeus's interpretation that the prophecy is referring to the oldest Olympians. This understanding would mean that the half-blood in the great prophecy currently could refer to me, Percy, and the Enter-Demeter cabin. There are also gods and goddesses still in existence who belong to the same generation as the older members of the Olympian Council, such as Hecate. This makes the possible pool of half-bloods the prophecy could apply to expand even more. Now the question of just who this half-blood might be becomes even more muddled when you stop to consider the fact that the Olympians are themselves fairly young as gods. There are gods far older than them, even if certain members of Olympus would prefer to deny the relationship. The phrase eldest gods could also, and some might argue even better, be applied to the primordial deities. If that's the case, then the half-blood in question is most likely not in camp if he or she has even been born yet. Naruto had to hold in a smirk as he looked at everyone's faces. Perhaps he shouldn't enjoy tearing their view of things to shreds. However, his extended family had really set themselves up to be knocked down. Skleip had used the Great Prophecy as an example of how one must always keep an open mind. That's why whenever the regents tried to interpret a prophecy, they called their interpretation the currently favored interpretation, since they understood that everything could change in an instant. Chapter 29. Many of the campers at Camp Half-Blood were woken up to a shout of, "Quit trying to hit me and hit me." This shout was quickly followed by a meaty thwack. These campers took one look at their alarm clocks and turned back over to sleep. They all recognized the sound of Naruto's voice from all their hours training with him and his clones. If someone wanted to be his personal punching bag at 5 in the morning, then that was their business. The campers just hoped that whoever the fool was didn't bleed all over wherever Naruto was training them at, and that they would keep the noise level down. In the amphitheater, Naruto calmly watched as Percy fell to the ground and painfully dragged himself over to one of the dozens of coolers filled with water that littered the amphitheater floor. Percy gripped the edge of the cooler and tipped it over so that the cooler fell and poured all of the water on him. Almost immediately, Percy started to hiss out in pain as numbed nerves healed enough to start sending their messages of utter agony to his brain. It took Percy another 2 minutes to heal up so that he could get back onto his feet. He then shouted out at Naruto, "Do you know how painful it is to almost have your spine snapped?" Naruto casually replied, "Yes, I do. In fact, I've had it happen enough times to me that I can tell you by feeling which vertebrae the near snap happened at. This is why having accelerated regeneration can be a curse in training. Now, as my master once told me, get your ass over here so that your beatdown can continue." The beatdown did continue as Percy was put into several piledrivers, slammed into the ground like Fred Flintstone by Naruto doing a Bam Bam impression, thrown into almost every pillar in the amphitheater, and just generally had the crap kicked out of him. Naruto made things even more difficult for Percy by blasting him by almost too much killing intent for him to handle. The key would be being almost. Naruto walked over to Percy and picked up the 2 teeth that his cousin had spit out during his rough landing. The older half-blood quickly picked Percy up with his free hand and hauled him over to one of the remaining full coolers. Naruto then unceremoniously shoved Percy's head in the water cooler and quickly shoved the collected teeth back in place. His cousin's water-enhanced healing took care of the rest. Once Naruto was sure Percy was healed, he lifted the out of the cooler and set him down on the ground next to him. Naruto then smiled at Percy and said, "That was a good training session, Percy. You improved quite a lot." Percy looked up at Naruto in shock and anger. "I improved? What are you talking about, Naruto? All we've done for the past hour is have you beat me black and blue. How has this been training?" To Percy's shock and surprise, Naruto actually started to laugh. "You have no idea how much you sound just like I did when my master started to train me seriously. Similar circumstances too, since like you I needed to get far stronger very quickly to complete an important task." Naruto paused for a second to sit down before he continued. "Like me, you are blessedly cursed with an enhanced regenerative ability, Percy." Faster than Percy could follow, Naruto pulled out a kunai, cut a nasty gash across his arm, and turned his arm so that Percy could see the wound close up before his eyes. Naruto continued to talk once the wound was completely healed. Enhanced regeneration is a blessing as it allows us to heal far faster or even heal at all from injuries that would incapacitate or cripple others. It is a curse because it makes us feel far more pain that others will have to deal with because they will pass out or even die long before us. Because of your regeneration, Percy, you, like I was by my master, and still do on my own, can be trained in conditions almost exactly like a real battle. Yes, I beat you black and blue. However, you will often find on the battlefield that your enemies are stronger, faster, more skilled, and more experienced than you. Your reflexes and reaction time has noticeably increased from where they were an hour ago by sheer necessity to avoid pain. Your resistance to killing intent has increased dramatically, as has your pain tolerance. Over the course of our training, you got to practice your hand-to-hand skills under conditions that counted as actually being battle experience. Finally, constant use of your healing abilities has increased the efficiency of them. There was a comfortable silence for a minute as the two boys relaxed. Despite Percy's wishes, he couldn't stay upset or angry at Naruto. The older half-blood might have put him through a new level of the fields of punishment, but he also kept things at a level that Percy could handle. Percy didn't know how Naruto knew just how far past Percy's limits the younger half-blood could be pushed. Perhaps it was because Naruto had undergone similar training in the past. It also helped that Naruto was completely relaxed and carefree now that he wasn't in training. After another minute of relaxation, Naruto stood up. His face shifted back to Drill Sergeant from Tartarus. "Up on your feet, Percy. We've had enough of a break and we've got almost 40 minutes until breakfast is ready to be served. Until then we can work on your endurance by running around camp. Now get up, as I expect us to get in at least 5 laps around camp before breakfast starts." Cordelia looked at the other 9 cabin counselors that were assembled in the big house, keeping a friendly smile on her face. Her friendliness was only as real as her mother's beauty. That is to say, it didn't exist at all in reality, and was only an illusion used by a vain and vindictive woman to get her own way. She was the last of the old guard among the counselors. Everyone assembled in the room besides Zoe, Chris, and Mr. D's brats had become counselors this year. Of course, none of her fellow senior counselors were her friends. The new counselors were too young for her normal incentives to work, and the gender ratio was less skewed than it had been. What made things worse for Cordelia was that the council had expanded, making it harder for her to have any sort of influence on the counselors' decisions. In a deceptively sweet voice, Cordelia said, "Thank you everyone for agreeing to meet with me at this time." She was immediately cut off by Percy, who said, "Hey, we're missing Naruto. Naruto. If this is supposed to be a counselor's meeting, then he needs to be here since he's the counselor for cabin 2. The other counselors noticed this and started to comment on it. Cordelia quickly moved to take control of the conversation by saying, "I know that Naruto is not here, but that is because the rules say he cannot be here because he is the subject of this debate. That's why I scheduled this meeting while he and Lady Artemis are having their date." Zoe almost instantly tightened her grip on the arms of her chair. The lieutenant of the hunt and consequently the counselor of cabin 8 wanted to beat up the Jezebel for the implications she was giving with her tone. You could technically call a private walk around the lake a few times a date, but Cordelia was trying to imply that things were a lot less innocent than they were. Zoe was not about to take any insult to her lady's honor lying down. Especially not an insult from a harlot who she had once caught pleasuring one of the former counselors as a favor for a vote. However, nothing Cordelia said could be challenged without making a bigger issue, so Zoe was forced to stomach the Scarlet Woman's attacks. In a hostile tone, Zoe replied, "And just what do thee wish to speak about which concerns Naruto?" Cordelia twirled a lock of her like her mother did to look innocent. "For over a year Naruto has been teaching all of us about ninshu. I know from a few fellow campers who have left camp that Naruto even has a small side business tutoring older half-bloods on how to use ninshu. He's been a full-fledged teacher to all of us instead of merely being an assistant instructor for younger campers. I think that we should ask Chiron and Mr. D to give Naruto the rank and privileges of being an instructor here at camp, since he is carrying out the duties and responsibilities of one." Several counselors started to chat with each other over the idea. Annabeth was not one of those counselors. She was instead hard at work trying to figure out what Cordelia was after. It was no secret to her that Cordelia despised Naruto. It made no logical sense for Cordelia to propose something beneficial to Naruto given her feelings to Naruto. That meant that there had to be something in this proposal that wouldn't be as great for Naruto as it appeared to be. Just what could Cordelia be planning to attack Naruto? Annabeth's eyes widened in shock as she realized what Cordelia was planning. Instructors taught classes, but they didn't go to them. They also couldn't join camper activities like capture the flag. Everyone knew that Annabeth was planning on getting Naruto's ban lifted as soon as the minimum time passed in 2 weeks. Tartarus, Naruto might even be kicked off of the counselor's council since it was for camp counselors, and as an instructor Naruto might not qualify as a counselor. Annabeth narrowed her eyes at Cordelia and saw the smirk in the bitch's eye. Cordelia wanted to isolate Naruto from as much of Camp Half-Blood as she could for petty revenge. Desperate to help Naruto, Annabeth blurted out, "Wait everyone. I think we're going about this all wrong. Naruto has been teaching everyone about Ninshu instead of just a few of us like assistant instructors normally done. However, that doesn't mean we need to insist that he become a full instructor at camp. Naruto hasn't complained about his situation in the least, and he hasn't expressed any interest in becoming a full instructor. Besides, there is nothing in the camp rules that say that a camper can be made an instructor." Cordelia quickly moved to counter Annabeth's arguments. "True, but you have forgotten to consider a few things yourself, Annabeth. First, Naruto is a relatively modest person even with his exuberance at times. It probably hasn't crossed his mind to ask for the position. Second and most importantly, there is nothing in the camp rules that say a camper cannot be made an instructor. We're in a new situation here since Naruto has introduced a completely new area for us to learn from. That's why we should ask Chiron and Mr. D to give Naruto the rank and privileges of being an instructor. We are just asking them to recognize Naruto's efforts here at camp after all." Castor, Zoe, and Chris quickly caught on to what Cordelia was trying to pull, and they started to voice their opposition to the plan. None of them could come right out and say what Cordelia was trying to do as they all knew that such a move would be a political blunder. However, the fact that Naruto's friends were speaking so vehemently against the move gave the others pause. The four counselors were able to slowly strip away support for Cordelia's plan until it was called to a vote and soundly defeated. Cordelia was able to act like a gracious loser, but she failed to hide the rage in her eyes. While Cordelia's attempt at revenge was being defeated, Naruto and Artemis were enjoying a quiet walk around the camp lake. Naruto was wearing his Camp Half-Blood t-shirt, cargo jeans loaded with various weapons, and Birkenstocks on his feet. Artemis was dressed like a cowgirl in her silver flannel button shirt, denim jeans, and silver leather cowboy boots. The couple was currently on the far side of the lake, well away from everyone else at camp. Their nearest companions were two hunters who were a respectful distance away from the near side of the lake. While the hunters knew that Artemis could handle herself, and that Naruto was a respectful young man, they still wanted to be there if their lady should need their aid. Their presence also had the bonus of keeping the other campers from thinking of interfering with Naruto and Artemis. Currently, the young couple was talking about Naruto's training with Percy. In a half-teasing, half-serious manner, Artemis said, "You know, Naruto, I can let you borrow a few of my wolves to help the boy with his speed training. Tying a pair of bloody stakes around his legs would provide enough motivation for my wolves to give him a great workout." Naruto let out a chuckle at that and replied, "I'll have to think about that one, Artemis. I just figured the fact that he can't outrun a tree would be proper motivation to get faster. However, if I do go forward with that idea, I want to test it out first by myself. My training regime for Percy is brutal because of the improvements he needs to make and the severe time constraints he's under, but I will only train him with exercises I've completed as well." Artemis nodded her head in agreement, as she was the same with training her hunters. She walked a couple of feet away from the lake, and then sat down with one leg stretched out. Naruto quickly laid down with his head resting in his hands by Artemis's left and his feet sticking out so that the two of them formed an L shape. The next few minutes passed in silence as the young couple simply enjoyed the fine summer day in peace. Eventually Artemis broke the silence by asking Naruto a question. "Naruto, would you rather be here at Camp Half-Blood, or back in Konoha?" Naruto quickly replied without even thinking, "Konoha." While Artemis somewhat expected Naruto's answer, she did still prefer Delos. Even after all of the places she'd been to over the centuries, she wasn't expecting such a quick and firm response. Artemis turned her head to look at Naruto and asked, "Why is that, Naruto?" "It's surprising for you to be so sure of your answer given how long you've been away from Konoha and everything you've learned about here in America. Usually, mortals and half-bloods in your position will need to think about that question for a little bit. The goddess was surprised when Naruto chuckled. Once Naruto stopped chuckling, he answered Artemis. The saying that there is no place like home might be corny, but it is very true. Before I came to Earth, I had several long-term missions that took me away from Konoha. I even had a 3-year training mission that took me to several different countries. On those trips and during my time here I've seen many very impressive sights and done some amazing things. However, I've never seen anything that would make me want to leave Konoha. I hope you can come to Konoha one day, Artemis, because it is a truly wondrous place. In the spring and summer, the village is filled with the scent of wild flowers from the surrounding wood. You can see something absolutely breathtaking in the fall as all of the leaves change. If you ever get the chance, Artemis, you have to look out on Konoha from the Hokage Monument at sunset during the fall. Every year I'm in Konoha at that time. I do my best to see that scene as much as possible, and it is inspiring every time. Even now, Naruto could recall those scenes in his mind in perfect clarity. His homeland was called the Land of Fire because of how it looked in autumn. Large swaths of the country were filled with forests. When the leaves changed color in the fall, the forests made it look like the land was on fire. This name was further reinforced by the fact that the people of his home country were usually known as a friendly and respectful people. Naruto's childhood was the great exception to this rule. Sure, there had been some very uncomfortable parallels between his early childhood and the forsaken child he had read about in The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, but Naruto had overcome that. Having his existence ignored except for some drunken taunts by almost everyone in the village had been agonizing as a child. Even now those memories still hurt, and they would probably be painful to Naruto for the rest of his life. Now that he was older, Naruto was able to forgive his fellow villagers for their actions against him even if he could never forget them. That Toby Slimeball's attack on Konoha with the Kyuubi had been something straight out of a kaiju movie. To make matters worse, Konoha never had to deal with Bijuu attacks like the other major villages since his clan had done such a good job keeping the Kyuubi sealed away. Between the deaths, raw property destruction, the Kyuubi's aura of terror, and the suddenness of the attack, it was only natural for humans to want something to blame for all of the grief they had from the attack. It was logical that people would direct their grief and rage at him as a scapegoat since he held the source of their pain, and he was an orphan who seemingly appeared out of nowhere. That didn't make it right or acceptable for so many to treat Naruto as they did when he was child. The half-blood turned his head so that he could look up at Artemis. Even with as bad as his childhood was, Naruto wouldn't trade it at all so that he wouldn't risk his life becoming any different. He had made dozens if not hundreds of friends since he was that little 6-year-old crying by the orphanage dumpster one rainy morning because none of the kids in the orphanage wanted to play with him. The pain of being alone and miserable had allowed Naruto to reach out to others in similar pains and help to pull them into the light. He had proven to everyone in Konoha that he was not what they had first thought he was and had grown to become one of Konoha's heroes. However, the most important thing to Naruto about his life was that he had received the gift of being able to talk to his parents and hear from them just how much they loved him. That alone was worth more to Naruto than a Mount Olympus-sized mound of gold. A small smile appeared on Artemis's lips as she heard Naruto talk about Konoha. When Artemis saw him look up at her, the smile on her face grew slightly bigger. She quickly got him talking more about his home village and his friends that lived there. Naruto's memory of Konoha even after 5 years allowed him to vividly describe the village enough for Artemis to easily visualize it in her head. He didn't boast about Konoha and instead told the honest truth about his home village. In a likewise manner, when Naruto talked about his friends, he mentions their flaws as well as their virtues without exaggerating or minimizing either set of traits. It was a rare and special kind of honesty that allowed to look at the truth about things around them and to be able to speak it. There was a positive tint to what Naruto was saying, but that was simply because of his personality. 8 days after Cordelia tried to get her revenge on Naruto, Camp Half-Blood got an extremely unexpected set of lunchtime visitors. One of the dryads who was carrying extra cuts of briskets from the kitchen turned and spotted the camp's new guests. Her eyes widened in shock and then she blurted out in trepidation, "Warai." Everyone in hearing range whipped their heads around and started to tremble. Others who hadn't heard the cry soon noticed everyone staring and turned to see what was happening. Soon, hushed whispers about the fates being in camp filled it with dread. Only Naruto was unafraid of the trio, and they were walking straight towards him. He was also the only one who saw Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos in the form of young women instead of old hags. Everyone in camp was rooted where they were as the fates walked towards Naruto. Only when the trio passed a table did the occupants of said table rediscover the ability to breathe. In this regard, the Olympians were just the same as the nature spirits and the half-bloods. Just the fact that the fates did not appear to want them caused people to relax a tad. That relaxation immediately ended when the three fates each folded their hands and gave Naruto a bow bending from the waist. The bow ended after about a second or so had passed. Everyone in camp, except for Naruto, were as pale as ghosts when they saw the fates bow. The fates never bowed to anyone. Zeus had once tried to get the fates to submit to him long ago when he first took over. The result had not been pleasant or painless for Zeus at all. That was the day that the Olympians learned that there were things worse than death, and that getting stuffed face first into a used chamber pot was the least of these sorts of things that the fates could force on the gods. Many campers were starting to wonder if they were about to start bunking with Hades as Naruto got up from the table and returned the bow. Those worries became fears when Naruto said, "It's nice to see you three again. Do you want to sit down and join us for lunch?" Dionysus was starting to wonder if he would be giving up his position as the god of madness soon. Mr. D figured that any guy who was willing to date Artemis, and did so have to be at least a little mad to go along with the brass balls the size of Sicily he was carrying. However, inviting the fates to lunch moved the camp director's opinion of Naruto from a little mad to being the conductor of Ozzy's train. The fates smiled and then began to speak in their patented way of seamlessly connecting each sentence that one of them said to what another said. "Thank you for the offer, Naruto. Unfortunately, we will have to decline your offer. Our time here is short, and we will soon have to depart. As you are aware, a threat from beyond Western civilization has apparently been making its way to the West. It has now reached the West, and it is time for you act. This item must be found and given to us so that we can send it back to its proper location. Anyone who touches or sees this item besides you and your chosen companions risks damnation whether they be mortal or divine." Suddenly the camp was filled with an eerie green mist and the fates began to glow in an otherworldly light. They then spoke as one with their combined voices creating a chilling echo effect. "Heed our words, O Gibberim of this age. This prophecy we give to you to help you in this task. With potential daughter head north, to find one whose blood chooses the slain. 3 clues to find what you seek, among warriors hiding in plain sight shall the first be gain. Near your entrance to your uncle's house rests the second, while the third is in the city of sin. By these clues 3 shall the item be found, and an enemy's dreams left in vain." The mist then vanished as the fates finished giving Naruto their prophecy. The fates bowed again to Naruto and then smiled at him. In their normal manner they smiled and said, "Thank you for taking care of this task for us, Naruto. No one else is capable and trustworthy enough to do this. Relax for today as you will have an early morning to start tomorrow." The fates then faded out of existence like mist in a breeze to the view of everyone in camp. Silence reigned over everyone in the camp for a minute as they tried to comprehend what they had just watched. What exactly was someone supposed to say when the fates themselves were thanking someone? Mr. D hoped that his father had been paying attention to camp at this time, because then Zeus would probably be out cold from shock. That would allow him the chance to have some much-needed hard liquor. An hour later a small meeting was being held in the big house to give Naruto some advice on his sudden quest. Chiron, Artemis, Zoe, Annabeth, Percy, and Chris were there with Naruto. Mr. D was in the next room doing a keg stand with 100 proof vodka since Zeus was apparently out in shock, and he really needed something to drink in order to deal with this mess. Everyone else in camp were still trying to wrap their minds around what they had witnessed during lunch. Chiron started the meeting by saying, "Well then, Naruto, I think the first question on everyone's mind is just what kind of threat are we facing?" Naruto quickly thought about the Yata no Kagami and made up his mind. "For your own safety, it is better that you all know as little about this item as you can. I only found out about it because I've developed several contacts that live beyond the influence of Olympus. Those contacts learned from their own sources that this item had gone missing, and whoever took it was taking it to the west. However, they didn't know where or when this item would show up here the last time I checked in with them." Percy blurted out, "Why didn't you mention this to anyone, Naruto?" He couldn't figure out why his cousin had kept quiet about something that posed a danger to everyone. Naruto shook his head in a slightly wistful manner. "Just what should I have said, Percy?" "Oh yeah, I've heard from sources none of you know exist that something incredibly dangerous is being shipped to America, but I have no clue when or where it will show up. I'm sorry, but intelligence gathering does not work like that. It was necessary for me to sit on this until I could get some hard facts or evidence to support my claims. This is especially true given the fact that the item in question is supposed to be dangerous to gods as well as mortals and half-bloods. I haven't even been able to find out who is behind this plot, which is an extremely important question to answer given the current Cold War between Olympus and Atlantis. If I revealed what I knew without answering this question, it could have easily made things worse." Chiron politely coughed and cut into the conversation. "Thank you for your work in intelligence gathering, Naruto, and I personally agree that you made the right decision for when you made it regarding this situation. However, I think we would all be better served at the present time by focusing on the prophecy given by the fates, so that Naruto can deal with this threat as quickly as possible. The fact that they came to camp to personally deliver this prophecy shows just how serious this matter is. Now, can anyone think of how this prophecy might be interpreted?" Artemis immediately spoke up. "I think the part with potential daughter head north is referring to a hunter being one of Naruto's companions on this quest, with them heading in northern direction to start the quest off. I view my hunters as my children. Since Naruto has the possibility of helping me complete my wager with Aphrodite, that would explain the potential part of the passage." There was a faint hint of gold on Artemis's cheeks as she said these words. Even now, Artemis still wasn't comfortable talking about her need to marry Naruto in public. Naruto groaned and said, "The second half of the prophecy's first line probably refers to one of my contacts. He's a reasonably good teen and reasonable in a fight. I don't want to on a quest with him and a girl, especially one that is a hunter, because he's lecherous and a massive porn addict. Don't worry, Artemis and Zoe, I know how to keep guys like him in line. Threats of castration or of being trapped in the illusion of being gay gang raped work quite well." To the other guys in the meeting's horror, Artemis and Zoe were taking notes. Continuing on, Naruto explained what he could. "The part about the 3 clues is as clear as it is vague. There are 3 things I and my companions will need to find in order to locate the item. However, it doesn't give any clue what these clues might be, so we'll have to keep our eyes open. I don't know what the warriors hiding in plain sight is about. However, the part about my uncle's house most likely refers to the cave system I used last year to visit Uncle Hades." Naruto paused for a second when he saw the shocked looks on everyone's faces. He held back another groan and started talking again. "Don't tell me that I'm the only one who visits Uncle Hades on a simple family visit instead of to pester him for a favor?" Moving on, the last line means that I'll need to find all 3 clues in order to find the item. It also says that an enemy's dream will be in vain, but it doesn't specify who the enemy is or what their dream is. With how open that part is, I might even end up creating an enemy, because my actions on the quest lead to their current dreams for life no longer being feasible." There was a moment of silence before Chiron spoke. "I think I have a lead on where the first and third clues might be. The Amazons are still around and run the company Amazon to help them function in the mortal world. This would explain the part about among warriors hiding in plain sight. As to the city of Sin, that one is a bit complicated. There are several cities that are well known for a reputation for a certain vice or vices. Since it is where the third clue is located, I am willing to guess that the locations of the first two clues will clarify which city it is. For now, I think that Las Vegas is a reasonable guess since it has a reputation for gambling, drinking, and other even less accepted social vices. Naruto waited a minute to see if anyone had anything else to add. After the minute of silence had passed, he said, I think we've got a good idea on what I can expect on my quest. I say we relax and double-check tomorrow morning before I and my companion head off to see if we've overlooked something. Artemis, could you and Zoe talk with the hunters and figure out who would be the best companion to join me on this quest? That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.